Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got several comments on this bill. First, a quick matter of housekeeping. I ask that on the first four judicial nominees that the committee considered that I be recorded as voting in person rather than by proxy.
Without objection.
On this bill, I want to start by commending Senator Klobuchar and Senator Grassley for their very hard work on this bill on a very complicated topic. I will say the discussion and debate we're having in this committee is nice and refreshing to actually see something resembling real debate on substance. It's something we as a committee and we as a Senate ought to do more often. I agree with many of the concerns that have been raised, and in particular, I would want to highlight, I think, the genuine and good faith concerns that Senator Lee has raised, that I believe are raised from a perspective of wanting a legal regime that makes sense and that functions and that doesn't create unintended consequences. I think those are concerns that should be considered carefully and given real weight. As I look at the bill, I agree in particular with the comments several people have made that when you look at big tech, there are a lot of abuses from big tech. Big tech are the robber barons of our modern age. And the power that has been aggregated in the hands of a handful of Silicon Valley billionaires exceeds any accumulation of power in the history of our country. It would make John D. Rockefeller blush to see the power today's big tech oligarchs wield. There are many abuses of that power. There are competitive abuses that hammer the little guy, that hammer small players, that leverage their monopoly power to produce massive profit windfalls. There are also censorship abuses, which many of us have raised. I've chaired multiple hearings on the censorship carried out by big tech. It is pervasive, it is malicious, and it is brazen. And Silicon Valley keeps getting worse and worse because no matter how egregious they get with censorship, they've discovered there are seemingly no limits and very few downsides to engaging in their self-declared role as the arbiters of what is allowed to be said and what is not allowed to be said. I think big tech censorship is the single greatest threat to free speech in America, and it is the single greatest threat to free and fair elections in America. And I wish this committee were addressing that problem directly and carrying through on our obligation to defend the constitutional rights of Americans, to defend free speech. I wish we were taking up directly a bill targeting big tech censorship, and I wish we had bipartisan agreement to do so. That's what we should be doing. We're not there yet. And this is not that bill. That being said, there are two things about this bill that I want to clarify that are my understanding of the language, and I want to say the manager's amendment that was filed, I think, improved the bill and improved the bill significantly. As the bill is drafted, I believe the bill would make some positive improvement as it concerns the problem of censorship. It doesn't protect consumers. I think it ought to protect everyone. This is targeted to businesses, so it is a subset of potentially impacted players. But as I read this statute, it would provide protections to content providers, to businesses that are discriminated against because of the content of what they produce. I think that is a meaningful step forward. That language is important. It's a protection that makes a difference to constituents in every one of our states. I'll say, secondly, numerous senators have pointed to potential unintended side effects, and I think we need to think about those carefully. I spent about 40 minutes on the phone yesterday with Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, who expressed significant concerns about the bill. One issue that he raised that I thought was a reasonable issue was a concern that the bill would would erect obstacles to Apple giving consumers the ability to opt out of apps monitoring what they're doing online, where they're going, what is occurring on their phone. And I want to clarify for the record that I don't read the language in this bill as applying to or as being intended to apply to tech companies giving consumers the ability to exercise choice or to opt out of privacy-invasive policies. The language of this bill, I believe, is entirely consistent with consumers being given the right to opt out, and I think we should give far more consumer choice. And so I don't believe this language creates an impediment to that practice, and I think we should see more empowerment of consumers to protect your individual consumer privacy. I filed several amendments to this bill. One amendment I filed to this bill is a speedy trial amendment. If you look at big tech, listen, most of us on this committee have been litigators. One of the key strategies of litigation, particularly if you're defense counsel, is to delay, bury your opponent in discovery, drag things out. I would note my home state of Texas has a lawsuit against Google, which unfortunately was transferred to a New York federal court where the practice of delay is ongoing right now. And big tech, in response to these suits from state AGs, from the federal government, their strategy, it ain't complicated, is to drag it out years and decades and hope that when we're all dead and buried, our grandkids will forget about whatever it was that was trying to be enforced against them. You know, I'm reminded of a great American lawyer and former Solicitor General of the United States, who just happened to be Senator Lee's father, who once wrote, quote, "There is a relationship between the quality of justice and the promptness with which it can be delivered." And he further wrote, "Judicial relief years after the event is seldom adequate." So this amendment is designed to prioritize these cases, to expedite them, to pose an impediment to the strategy we know big tech will engage in, which is delay, and drag it out. I also have a second amendment that allows for a private right of action, allows for those injured by the abuses of big tech to file lawsuits. Now, in this, I find myself in a curious position. It is usually my Democratic colleagues who are proposing private rights of action. And it is usually Republicans who are expressing concerns about additional litigation. I will say from my perspective, the abuses of big tech are so egregious that I am more than happy to unleash the trial lawyers. And that ought to at least pique the interest of a couple of Democrats on this committee. I think private causes of action can be tremendously effective in vindicating and enforcing rights. I recognize that some of the Republican sponsors of this bill have concerns with that, and I understand that. So I introduced a third amendment that was designed to be a middle ground, less than a private cause of action, which is allowing essentially qui tam type proceedings, private rights of action like the False Claims Act, that are brought by private litigants on behalf of the government and with the government's authorization. One of the challenges of taking on big tech is they have unlimited resources. And even government, whether it is the federal government or state governments, finds themselves dwarfed by the armies of lawyers that big tech can send in. I believe that creating a mechanism where there is a financial incentive for private litigation with a check, a quality check that can't be unduly abusive, because just like a False Claims Act, the government has the ability to stop it if it's unduly abusive. I think that is a middle ground. I would note that Senator Grassley in particular has been a vocal supporter of the False Claims Act and using it And my purpose in introducing this amendment was to find a middle ground that some of the Republican supporters of this bill would be willing to support, but that would add additional teeth to the enforcement mechanism. Because I do think it would be unfortunate for us to pass a bill directed at the abuses of big tech and have it lack the teeth, lack the force to actually be effective. I want us not only to address the abuses, but to solve them. I would note, by the way, also several members of this committee have said, well, gosh, why is it focused on the giant companies? Well, because they're the monopolists. We're not really concerned about the mom and pop store. Even if they engage in bad conduct, the mom and pop store doing so has really limited scope. But if you look at the thresholds in this bill, $550 billion, that ain't small. Even in the American economy, even in the global economy, those are massive numbers. And I think Senator Klobuchar is right that there are some companies that fall into it today, but they may not fall into it tomorrow. And there may be new ones. You know, there might have been a time when we would draft a bill directed at AOL. Well, that bill wouldn't make any sense anymore because AOL's no longer in a dominant position. The world of tech will change. This is designed to address dominant monopolists and to give meaningful constraints. Now, right now, my understanding is that the authors of this bill are not prepared right now to adopt these amendments. I'm going to refrain from offering these amendments. But Senator Klobuchar and Senator Grassley have both expressed a willingness to work with me in good faith to potentially incorporate these amendments. And I'm going to take their representations. I look forward to working with both senators on incorporating these amendments. And today I'm prepared to vote to move this bill along, to move it towards the floor. But whether or not this bill gets my support on the floor will depend on how we work together to incorporate these amendments. And I trust my colleagues will follow through on their commitments to work together to incorporate these. I think moving forward is a step that makes sense, and I'm prepared to vote that way today.
Thank you, Senator.